Okay, the purpose of this video is to go over some of the sources that we used to first introduce our Navi curriculum. While we're mostly going to be doing sources in the books of Yirmiyahu and then later Ezra and Nehemiah, for now, I decided to focus on some introductory sources to the theme for the Navi curriculum, which is land and exile. What I want to talk about in this unit is how it seems from the Chumash and the Navi that there's an interesting tension between the fact that on the one hand, our land, Eretz Yisrael, is very important to us. It's something which Hashem promises the Avot, and it's considered a major step in our history when we enter that land and conquer that land. But on the other hand, as important as land is for us, God always anticipated that there could be times when we'll be separated from our land, and it was important to him as well that we therefore not think that the land is the end-all and be-all of our identity. We're not simply a group, as Jews that are united around Eretz Yisrael, but we have a value system, beliefs, religion, customs, all these things that make us Jewish beyond just our land. And I wanted to show how this plays out in some of the earliest sources we have from Tanakh on this issue. So in the book of Breshit, we have something called Brit Ben HaBetarim over here, where Hashem promises Abraham that his descendants are eventually going to inherit Eretz Yisrael. Right? He tells them that eventually they're going to conquer a huge amount of land, Minahar Mitzrayim ad Nahar Gadol Nahar Prat, from the river in Egypt, which I think we mentioned in class is either the Nile, or some people think it might be Wadi El Arish, which is in the Sinai Peninsula, somewhere south of Israel, all the way to Nahar Prat, to the Euphrates River. And it lists a whole bunch of tribes that live in this land. Some of them we've heard of from elsewhere in Tanakh, like the Chiti or the Emori, obviously the Kanaani in Eretz Canaan. Some of you might not have heard otherwise about the Kadmoni, however, or the Keni or the Kenizi, these extra tribes mentioned in Pasuk Yud Tet. Moreover, it's interesting that before God even promises this land, he emphasizes that we're going to suffer first in servitude. He first tells Abraham, Yadoa teda ki ger yezaracha be'eretz lo lahem. You should know that your descendants are going to be slaves, so they're going to be living as strangers in a land that's not theirs, strangers in a strange land. Va'avadum, and the people there are going to enslave them, v'inu otam, and will oppress them for 400 years. Now, we were not necessarily in Egypt for 400 years. There's a big debate about how long we were actually there. This may include times even before we went down to Egypt when Yitzchak or Yaakov were living in Eretz Canaan, but as foreigners, as strangers, because it wasn't their country. And so we're being promised this huge amount of land, including certain tribes that weren't even conquered in Yeshua's time. And at the same time, we're being told that in order to get there, first we have to go through this period of being strangers in a strange land, which will include at least some years of slavery, slavery and oppression. So Radak makes an interesting observation here. Radak says, in this vision, Ramaz v'lo bezeh, sheyushuo to kula l'sibat hagalut hazeh. God is alluding to the fact that we're going to inherit all of this land, including these tribes we never heard of, all the way to the Euphrates River. Why is God alluding? What's God alluding with that? Because of this galut. When Radak says this galut, he means the galut that he was in and that we are still in after the Second Temple's destruction. All our years of exile in Europe and North Africa and the Middle East and all over the world. How is God hinting to that in this pasuk? Ki amar lo sheyitem lezaro eser umot shezachar. Because God mentions here 10, you can count them, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 tribes that we're going to inherit. Uvirusha rishona lo yershu ala eretz shiva umot. If you look in Yoshua, look what they actually conquered. Yoshua only conquered the land of 7 tribes. And so God's telling Abraham that someday you're going to inherit a larger portion of land than what Yoshua is going to conquer. That tells you that it teaches you that this statement that this promise God made is for the future, for the future as well. So it's not just that we're going to inherit Eretz Canaan or some of the promised land in Yoshua's time or later in the time of the Second Temple or Ezra's time, or the Maccabim are going to conquer some of that land. Says Radak, Hashem is already hinting here that there'll be some later time where Jews will return to Israel hundreds of years later and conquer even more land than that. And so, according to Radak, already when God is first promising us the land at Brit Bnei B'tarim, he's already thinking about the fact that there's going to be this ongoing process of conquering land and then being exiled and conquering land again. And so he knows we're constantly going to be going back and forth as Jews with sovereignty in Eretz Yisrael and Jews without sovereignty in Eretz Yisrael. And he's preparing us in this covenant with Abraham for both of those experiences. Similarly, 2 chapters later in Breshit, God appears to Abraham again and makes a covenant with him called Brit Milah, where Abraham and all his male descendants have to get circumcised. And in exchange for, that's our part of the covenant, what's God's end of the bargain? V'natati lecha u'zarecha acharecha et eretz megurecha, et kol eretz Canaan lachuzat olam, v'iti lahem le'elohim. God says, I'm going to give you Abraham, and your descendants after you, eretz megurecha, the land of your migurim. That literally means the land of your sojourning, the land that you kind of wander around like a foreigner in Eretz Canaan. You're going to have it as an achuzat olam. So what's the difference between Abraham having the land as eretz megurecha, land of his wandering, of his sojourning, and a later generation having it as achuzat olam? So says Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, who himself was a Jew in exile, he lived in Germany in the 1800s, early 1900s, he says these two terms mean as follows. This land which for Abraham was a land of wandering, right? Because Abraham constantly travels through it, but he doesn't rule over it. Abraham does not have sovereignty. He doesn't have a country in that land. He's one guy with his family in a land that's occupied by other tribes. So that land which for Abraham is a land that he just kind of wanders through. L'tze'at sa'av, for his descendants, his descendants have to inherit it permanently. Achaz is to grab onto something, to hold on to something, right? Achaz. So we're going to grab on and possess Eretz Yisrael la'olam, forever. Says Rav Tzvi Hoffman, Yesh kan efo haftacha gedola yoter l'tze'at sa'av mizot shenitna la'Avram atzmo. This means that Avram's descendants have a greater haftacha, a greater promise than Avram himself. Right? Here God said, Natati lecha u'zarecha acharecha, I'm giving this land to you and your descendants. But Avraham had one experience in that land. Avraham had an experience where the truth is certain Jews had in later times. You read about Jews who lived in Israel in the 1800s, or Jews who lived in Israel in the Middle Ages. There were periods where you had small Jewish communities in the land of Israel, but the land itself was ruled by the Ottoman Turks, or by Christian crusaders for a brief period. There are various periods where these non-Jewish empires or non-Jewish kingdoms ruled the land. To go back further than that, we can speak of the Byzantine Empire, or the Greeks before the Maccabees revolted against them. There are various times where Jews had a community in the land of Israel, but the overall governance, the overall rule, was by a foreign power. So that's similar to what Avraham had, where he's like a stranger in his own country, a foreigner in his own country. But ultimately, his descendants in Yehoshua's time, in times of the Malachim, again when the Maccabees got independence, or for that matter, again today in the state of Israel, there are periods where Avram's descendants rule over it with sort of full possession of it, full independent sovereignty over that land. And so God is saying there are two ways we can have that connection with Eretz Yisrael. One is for a Jew to live there simply as a Jew living in the Holy Land, which itself has value. That's what Avram had. But the downside of that is that we still feel like strangers. And so Rav Tzvi Hoffman says, even greater than that is the time when we're going to have Achuzat Olam. There's mention an interesting question here that's not on this source sheet, interesting halacha question. If you're a Jew who could live in a major Jewish community outside of Israel that's so large that you actually have your own autonomy where you govern yourselves, or you could live as a Jew in the land of Israel at a time when the Jews have no Jewish government. So which is better? Is it better to live as a Jew in the land of Israel with no Jewish government, or in a self-governing Jewish community in Chutz La'aretz? So the halacha is, living in the land of Israel is considered such a great mitzvah that even then it's a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel, even without Jewish sovereignty. But what David Hoffman is telling us here is that while there's some value to that, clearly there's value to what Avraham did living in the Holy Land, but there's an even greater level of fulfillment of our covenant with God when we're able to live in the land as an achuzat olam, where we have this full eternal possession of Eretz Israel. Looking ahead to when the Jews actually leave Egypt, God remembers this covenant. He says, Hakimot yet briti itam, I fulfilled my covenant with them, with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because I gave them Eretz Megureihem, I gave them the land of their sojourning. But what they didn't have, which I'm going to do now for Bnei Israel, is now I'm going to take you to be my nation, and I'm going to bring you into that land. I'm going to bring you into that land that I promised Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I'm going to give it to you as a morasha, as a full inheritance. So it's like God is saying, again, they lived there, the Avot lived in Eretz Israel without really ruling over it. I'm going to bring you in to inherit the land, to fully rule over it, fully control it. Interestingly, in between these two promises, though, God interjects, by the way, when I do that, I'm also going to take you to be my nation, I'm going to be your God, and you're going to know that I'm Hashem, your God. So why I say in between these two promises, right, the Avot lived there temporarily, you're going to live there permanently with full sovereignty, but before that, just know that I'm your God. So again, Rav David Shri Hoffman speaks up, and he says, God's trying to tell us here, with this hefsek, with this interruption of, you should know that I'm your God, he's saying, I want you to know that being my nation, being the nation of God, being Am Hashem, it's not about being located in Eretz Israel. Rather, it has to come first. Why? Because you have many nations where, being an American, for most people, it just means that you live in America. Maybe you were born in America but live somewhere else, so you have a U.S. passport. But Am Yisrael, being part of Bnei Israel is not the same thing as being an American. By most nations, by America, the character of the American people and the mission, the destiny of the American people is a product of the land that fell to them, right? Because we live in America, that's why our fate is bound up in American values. And if we move somewhere else, we lose that. But with Am Yisrael, it has to be the reverse. First, we have Kviyat HaYiyud. First, we establish our destiny, our values, and then that has to come Kodem, Likdom, that has to precede Yerushat HaAretz. Right? So the land is important, but the land is what he calls a machshir lasagat hayud. The land is one more way we can fulfill our destiny. We can better fulfill our destiny if we have a Jewish nation in God's land than without that. But first, we have to understand what our destiny is. So first, God says, know that I'm your God, and he expresses that by giving us the Torah. And so then Tziv similarly points out, right, that clearly the Torah here was given to us, apparently, in Chutz La'aretz, and then we come to inherit the land. And so, according to Rav Hoffman, the Torah is reminding us here, you should not think that land is the end-all and be-all of everything. Even on the contrary, the end-all and be-all of everything for us is our value system. And the land is there. Once we have our values, when we bring our values to Eretz Yisrael and build a nation there, that's the way that we can live up to those values with more richness and more depth. On the other hand, the Netziv points out that the other thing that's accomplished by Hashem promising us while we're still in Egypt that the land we enter will be our permanent inheritance, he's trying to say, don't lose sight of the fact that the land is still very important. I'm going to call it an inheritance because you should know that when somebody leaves his family land, right, we all, when you grow up, become an adult, move somewhere else, you still feel an attachment to the place where you grew up. And here as well, the Netziv says, God's telling us, even when I'm going to send you into exile, b'shasha atem golim, it's still your land, right? So even if we're a Jew living in America, Eretz Yisrael is still a place we should feel a connection to. Just like somebody who leaves the Yerushat Avotav, the field of his father's inheritance, he always thinks, he never wants to forget what his homeland was. And so Rav Hoffman and the Netziv are saying in two different sides of things here, is that on the one hand, it's important for us to realize that our values come first, and with that we inherit the land. But on the other hand, even when we're away from the land, we should always be longing to go back to it. One last source I wanted to point out here is what happened when we actually conquered the land. If you read the Psukim in Yoshua, it sounds like it was this perfect scenario where God gave us peace from all the nations around us. No one stood up to us from all our enemies. God handed them all over. Everything God promised us about the land was all fulfilled. But the Radak puts an asterisk here. He notes that's only true in terms of what God did for us. But there were certain places that were unconquered due to our own laziness.